No summons to Islam had yet been made in public, but there was an ever-increasing group of devout believers and intense worshippers, both men and women, most of them young. Amongst the first to come, apart from those already mentioned, were the Prophet's cousins Ja'far and Zubair. Then came other cousins, his and theirs, the sons of their aunt Umaymah, Abidallah ibn Yash and his brother Ubaydallah, and the son of their aunt Bara, Abu Salamah. There were also 2 cousins on his mother's side, Sa'd the son of Abu Waqqas of Zurah and his younger brother Umair. But not one of the Prophet's 4 uncles showed any inclination to follow him. Abu Talib made no objection to the Islam of his 2 sons Ja'far and Ali, but for himself he said he was not prepared to forsake the religion of his forefathers. Abbas was evasive and Hamza uncomprehending, though both assured him of their unfailing affection for him personally. But Abu Lahab showed plainly his conviction that his nephew was self-deceived, if not a deceiver. After the revelation of the verse "Warn thy family who are thy nearest of kin," the Prophet called Ali to him, and said, "God hath commanded me to warn my family, my nearest of kin, and the task is beyond my strength. But make ready food, with a leg of mutton, and fill a cup with milk, and assemble together the Bani Abdul Muttalib, that I may tell them that which I have been commanded to say." Ali did exactly as he had been told, neither more nor less, and most of the clan of Hashim came to the meal, about 40 men. When they were assembled, said Ali, the Prophet told me to bring in the food which I had made ready. Then he took a piece of meat, bit upon it, and cast it again into the dish, saying, "Take it in the name of God." The men ate in relays, several at a time, until not one of them could eat any more. "But," said Ali, "I could see no change in the food, except that it had been stirred by men's hands, and by my life, if they had been but one man, he could have eaten all that I had put before them." Then the Prophet said, "Give them to drink," so I brought the cup, and each drank his fill, though one man alone could have emptied that cup. But when the Prophet was about to address them, Abu Lahab forestalled him and said, "Your host hath placed a spell upon you," whereat they dispersed before he could speak. The next day the Prophet told Ali to do exactly as he had done the previous day. So, another similar meal was prepared and everything went as before, except that this time the Prophet was on his guard and made sure of addressing them. "O sons of Abdul Muttalib," he said, "I know of no Arab who hath come to his people with a nobler message than mine. I bring you the best of this world and the next. God hath commanded me to call you unto him. Which of you, then, will help me in this, and be my brother, mine executor, and my successor amongst you?" There was silence throughout the clan. Ja'far and Zayd could both have spoken, but they knew that their Islam was not in question and that the purpose of the gathering was to bring in others than themselves. But when the silence remained unbroken, the 13-year-old Ali felt impelled to speak, and said, "O Prophet of God, I will be thy helper in this." The Prophet laid his hand on the back of Ali's neck and said, "This is my brother, mine executor, and my successor amongst you. Hearken unto him, and obey him." The men rose to their feet, laughing and saying to Abu Talib, "He hath ordered thee to hearken unto thy son and to obey him." As to the Prophet's aunts, Safiya had no hesitation in following him as her son Zubair had done, but her 5 sisters could not bring themselves to make any decision. Arwa's attitude was typical of them all. "I am waiting to see what my sisters will do," she would say. On the other hand, his aunt by marriage, Al-Fadl, the wife of the hesitant Abbas, was the first woman to enter Islam after Khadijah, and she was soon able to bring 3 of her sisters to the Prophet: Maymuna, her full sister, and 2 half-sisters, Salma and Asma. It was in the household of Al-Fadl that Ja'far had been brought up, and it was there that he had come to know and to love Asma, whom he had recently married, and Hamza had married her sister Salma. Another of the first to respond was Ayman. The Prophet said of her, "He that would marry a woman of the people of paradise, let him marry Ayman," and this remark was overheard by Zayd, who took it deeply to heart. She was much older than he was, but that did not deter him, and he spoke his mind to the Prophet, who had no difficulty in persuading Ayman to agree to the marriage. She bore Zayd a son whom they named Usama, and he was brought up as the grandson of the Prophet, who dearly loved him. In these early days of Islam, the companions of the Prophet would often go out together in groups to the glens outside Mecca where they could pray the ritual prayer together without being seen. But one day a number of idolaters came upon them while they were praying and rudely interrupted them with ridicule. Finally, they came to blows, and Sa'd of Zurah struck one of the disbelievers with the jawbone of a camel and wounded him. This was the first bloodshed in Islam. But after that they decided to refrain from violence until God should decide otherwise, for the revelation continually enjoined patience upon the Prophet and therefore upon them. Bear with patience what they say, and part from them with a courteous farewell, and also deal gently with the disbelievers, give them respite for a while. This case of violence had been something of an exception on both sides, for Quraysh as a whole were disposed to tolerate the new religion, even after the Prophet had openly proclaimed it, until they saw that it was directed against their gods, their principles, and their inveterate practices. Once they had realized this, however, some of their leading men went in a body to Abu Talib, to insist that he should restrain his nephew's activities. He put them off with a conciliatory answer, but when they saw that he had done nothing they came to him again and said, "O Abu Talib, thine is a high and honorable position amongst us, and we have asked thee to hold in check thy brother's son, but thou hast not done so. By God, we will not suffer our fathers to be insulted, our way scoffed at, and our gods reviled. Either make him desist, or we will fight you both." Then they left him, and in great distress he sent for his nephew, and having told him what they had threatened, he said, "O son of my brother, spare me and spare thyself. Lay not upon me a burden greater than I can bear." But the Prophet answered him saying, "I swear by God, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left on condition that I abandon this course before he hath made it victorious, or I have perished therein, I would not abandon it." 3 Then, with tears in his eyes, he rose to his feet and turned to go, but his uncle called him back. "Son of my brother," he said, "go thou and say what thou wilt, for by God I will never forsake thee on any account." When they found that their words had achieved nothing with Abu Talib, Quraysh still hesitated to attack his nephew directly, for, as a chief of clan, Abu Talib had power to grant inviolate protection, and it was in the interests of every other chief of clan in Mecca to see that the rights of chieftaincy were duly respected. So, they confined themselves for the moment to organizing a widespread persecution of all those adherents of the new religion who had no one to protect them. Meantime they consulted together in an attempt to form a common policy about the cause of their trouble. The situation was exceedingly grave. The time of the pilgrimage would soon be upon them and Arabs would come to Mecca from all over Arabia. They, Quraysh, had a high reputation for hospitality, not only as regards food and drink but also because they made every man welcome, both him and his gods. But this year pilgrims would hear their gods insulted by Muhammad and his followers, and they would be urged to forsake the religion of their forefathers and to adopt a new religion which appeared to have numerous disadvantages. No doubt many of them would not come to Mecca again, which would not only be bad for trade but would also diminish the honor in which the guardians of the sanctuary were now held. At the worst, the Arabs might league together to drive them out of Mecca and to establish another tribe or group of tribes in their place, as they themselves had previously done with Khuza'ah, and as Khuza'ah had done with Jurum. It was therefore imperative that the visiting Arabs should be told that Muhammad in no way represented Quraysh. But although it was easy to deny his prophethood, that was merely to express an opinion and indirectly to invite others to listen to his claims and judge for themselves. Something else needed to be said in addition, and here lay their weakness, for some had taken to saying that he was a soothsayer, others that he was possessed, others that he was a poet, yet others that he was a sorcerer. They consulted Walid the son of Mughira, probably the most influential man of the tribe at that time, as to which of these accusations would be best likely to convince, and he rejected them all as wide of the mark. But on second thoughts he decided that although the man in question was certainly not a sorcerer, he had at least one thing in common with sorcerers: he had the power to separate a man from his father or from his brother or from his wife or from his family in general. He advised them therefore to let their unanimous accusation be along those lines, namely that Muhammad was a dangerous sorcerer, to be avoided at all costs. Having readily agreed to follow his advice, they decided that outside the town all the roads by which Mecca was approached must be manned, and that visitors must be warned in advance to be on their guard against Muhammad, for they knew from their own experience how winning he could be. Had he not been, before he began preaching, one of the best-loved men in Mecca? Nor had his tongue lost any of its eloquence, nor his presence anything of its compelling majesty. They carried out their plans with zeal and thoroughness. In at least one particular case, however, they were doomed to failure from the outset. A man of the Bani Ghaffar named Abu Obar, his tribe lived to the northwest of Mecca, not far from the Red Sea, had already heard of the Prophet and of the opposition to him. Like most of his tribesmen, Abu Dar was a highwayman, but unlike them he was a firm believer in the oneness of God, and he refused to pay any respect to idols. His brother Unis went to Mecca for some reason, and on his return, he told Abu Dar that there was a man of Quraysh who claimed to be a prophet and who said there is no God but God, and his people had disowned him in consequence. Abu Dar immediately set off for Mecca, in the certainty that here was a true prophet, and on his arrival those of the Quraysh who manned the approaches told him all he wished to know before he had time to ask. Without difficulty he found his way to the prophet's house. The prophet was lying asleep on a bench in the courtyard, with his face covered by a fold of his cloak. Abu Dar woke him and wished him good morning. "On thee be peace," said the prophet. "Declaim unto me thine utterances," said the Bedouin. "I am no poet," said the prophet, "but what I utter is the Quran, and it is not I who speak but God who speaketh." "Recite for me," said Abu Dar, and he recited to him a surah, whereupon Abu Dar said, "I testify that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God." "Who are thy people?" said the prophet, and at the man's answer he looked him up and down in amazement and said, "Verily God guideth whom he will." It was well known that the Bani Ghaffar were mostly robbers. Having instructed him in Islam, the prophet told him to return to his people and await his orders. So, he returned to the Bani Ghaffar, many of whom entered Islam through him. Meantime he continued his calling as highwayman, with special attention to the caravans of Quraysh. But when he had despoiled a caravan, he would offer to give back what he had taken on condition that they would testify to the oneness of God and the prophethood of Muhammad. Another encounter with the prophet had the result of bringing Islam to the Bani Dawes, who were also, like Ghaffar, an outlying western tribe. Tufail, a man of Dawes, told afterwards how he had been warned on his arrival in Mecca against speaking to the sorcerer Muhammad or even listening to him lest he should find himself separated from his people. Tufail was a poet and a man of considerable standing in his tribe. Quraysh were therefore especially insistent in their warning, and they made him so afraid of being bewitched that before going into the mosque he stuffed his ears with cotton wool. The prophet was there, having just taken up his stance for prayer between the Yemeni corner and the Black Stone as was his wont, facing towards Jerusalem, with the southeast wall of the Kaaba immediately in front of him. His recitation of Quranic verses was not very loud, but some of it nonetheless penetrated Tufail's ears. "God would not have it," he said, "but that he should make me hear something of what was recited, and I heard beautiful words. So, I said to myself, I am a man of insight, a poet, and not ignorant of the difference between the fair and the foul. Why then should I not hear what this man is saying? If it be fair, I will accept it, and if foul, reject it." I stayed until the prophet went away, whereupon I followed him, and when he entered his house, I entered it upon his heels and said, "O Muhammad, thy people told me this and that, and they so frightened me about thy state that I stuffed mine ears lest I should hear thy speech. But God would not have it but that he should make me hear thee. So, tell me thou the truth of what thou art." The prophet explained Islam to him and recited the Quran, and Tufail made his profession of faith. Then he returned to his people, determined to convert them. His father and his wife followed him into Islam, but the rest of Dawes held back, and he returned to Mecca in great disappointment and anger, demanding that the prophet should put a curse on them. But instead, the prophet prayed for their guidance and said to Tufail, "Return to thy people, call them to Islam, and deal gently with them." These instructions he faithfully followed, and as the years passed more and more families of Dawes were converted. Before meeting the prophet, Tufail had only met his enemies, but other pilgrims met also his followers who told them a story very different from what the enemies told them, and each believed what his nature prompted him to believe. As a result, the new religion was spoken of, well or ill, throughout all Arabia, but nowhere was it more a theme of talk than in the oasis of Yathrib.